Hello everyone. Before we begin, I want to share something important with you. Unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized my previous channel. I put a lot of hard work into creating these videos for you, and because of this, I've decided to move forward with a new channel. I'm continuing the same content, with even better quality and consistency. Please support me by subscribing to my new channel. The link is in the description. Your support truly means everything to me. Thank you. Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, also, let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. They found a locked room in the police station, and inside was evidence from crimes that haven't happened yet ***. The screaming started at exactly 3:17 a.m. No one in Cedar Hollow ever forgot that time. Not because it was loud, but because it was recorded inside a police station interrogation room that had been locked for 23 years. Officer Daniel Klein was the one who heard it first. He was halfway through his overnight paperwork when the sound came through the station's old security speakers. A distorted, panicked scream, followed by the sound of metal scraping across tile. Daniel froze, his pen hovering over an arrest report that suddenly felt meaningless. He turned slowly toward the hallway monitor mounted above the dispatch desk. The hallway outside interrogation room 3 flickered into view. The door was open. Daniel frowned. That wasn't possible. Room 3 had been sealed shut since 2003, after what the department referred to only as the Ashcroft incident. New officers were told not to ask questions. Veterans avoided the topic entirely. The room had been locked, boarded internally, and disconnected from the building's active use. And yet, the security feed clearly showed the door standing halfway open, darkness pooling inside like liquid shadow. Daniel pushed back his chair. "Dispatch, did someone authorize entry to room 3? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Static crackled across the radio. "No one's in that wing," came the reply. "Maintenance doesn't even have access." Daniel swallowed. The scream echoed again through the speakers, closer this time. More desperate. It sounded like someone clawing at a metal surface while begging for help. His stomach twisted. Training said wait for backup. Instinct said someone was dying. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and sidearm and stepped into the hallway. The Cedar Hollow police station was older than most buildings in town. Built in 1956, it had narrow corridors, flickering fluorescent lights, and ventilation ducts that hummed like distant whispers. Daniel had worked here for 6 months, just long enough to notice the way certain officers avoided walking near the east wing after midnight. Tonight, the hallway leading to interrogation room 3 felt colder than the rest of the station. His breath fogged slightly as he approached, boots echoing softly across the tile. The door creaked open wider as he stepped closer. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam cut through darkness and landed on the interrogation table. Someone was sitting there. A man, head lowered, hands cuffed to the table ring, shoulders trembling. Daniel's pulse hammered. "Sir," he called cautiously. "This is Officer Klein. Are you injured?" The man didn't respond. Instead, Daniel noticed something strange. The cuffs weren't department issued. They were older, thick steel, scratched and rusted along the edges. The type used decades ago before modern restraint standards. Daniel stepped inside. The air smelled wrong. Damp. Metallic. Like wet concrete mixed with something faintly rotten. The man slowly raised his head. Daniel froze. The prisoner's face was bruised, lips split, eyes bloodshot from crying. But what made Daniel's breath catch was the tape across the man's mouth, and the words written on it. "It's not done yet." Daniel rushed forward and ripped the tape off. The man gasped violently, sucking in air like he had been drowning. "You have to get me out," he whispered hoarsely. "Please, before it starts again." Daniel immediately reached for the cuffs. "Who did this to you? How did you get in here?" The man's eyes widened in terror. "You did." Daniel blinked. "What?" "You arrested me," the man said, voice shaking. "You brought me here 3 nights from now." Daniel's stomach dropped. "That's impossible." The man leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed. "You think this is happening now," he whispered. "It already happened for me." Daniel stepped back, heart pounding. "What's your name?" "Thomas Weller." Daniel's mind raced. The name sounded vaguely familiar. He couldn't place it. Why would I arrest you? Daniel asked. Thomas stared at him, tears forming. For murder. Daniel's jaw tightened. Who was murdered? Thomas hesitated, then whispered something that made Daniel's blood run cold. You. The station lights flickered violently. The overhead bulb above the interrogation table popped, sending sparks raining down. The room plunged into dim emergency lighting. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to call for backup, but his radio had gone dead, emitting nothing but static. Thomas began shaking. It's coming, he whispered. This is when it started last time. What is? Daniel demanded. Thomas's eyes darted toward the observation mirror. Daniel turned slowly. The glass was cracked. Not shattered. Cracked from the inside. A thin fracture spread across the surface like a spiderweb, pulsing as if something behind it was pressing outward. Daniel drew his weapon. Who's back there? He shouted. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate knock from inside the observation room. 3 taps. Daniel moved toward the mirror cautiously, flashlight beam trembling slightly in his grip. Police, he called. Identify yourself. Another 3 taps. Then a voice. Low. Distorted. Mechanical, like someone speaking through water. Officer Klein. Daniel froze. How do you know my name? The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, something pressed against the cracked glass from the other side. A silhouette. Human-shaped, but too tall, and standing completely still. You opened the door too early, the voice said calmly. Now the timeline is broken. Daniel's throat went dry. What timeline? Behind him, Thomas began sobbing. You weren't supposed to find me yet, the voice continued. Now it's going to accelerate. The cracks across the mirror deepened. Daniel aimed his weapon directly at the silhouette. Step forward and identify yourself, or I'm breaching this room. The figure didn't move. Instead, it slowly raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass. The skin looked wrong. Pale. Almost gray. Covered in what looked like faint surgical markings, or symbols carved into flesh. Thomas screamed behind him. That's him. That's the watchman. Daniel spun around. What watchman? The one who records the endings, Thomas cried. He's been documenting every death in Cedar Hollow since 1981. Daniel stared at him. That makes no sense. It will, Thomas whispered. When you see the files. Daniel frowned. What files? Thomas slowly nodded toward the far corner of the interrogation room. Daniel turned and saw something that absolutely should not have been there. A metal filing cabinet. Ancient. Rusted. Locked with a heavy chain. Daniel walked toward it slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. A label was bolted to the front drawer. Black letters scratched into metal. Cedar Hollow, cases, unsolved/unhappened. Daniel's hands trembled as he touched the chain. What does that mean? He asked quietly. Thomas swallowed hard. It means every crime that's about to happen is already documented inside. Daniel stared at him. You're lying. I wish I was. The glass behind Daniel exploded. Not outward. Inward. Shards rained across the floor as the silhouette stepped through the observation room doorway, now somehow standing inside the interrogation wing despite the locked entrance. Daniel spun, weapon raised. The figure stood at the doorway, impossibly tall, wearing what looked like a dark maintenance uniform from decades ago. Its face was hidden beneath a cracked plastic security visor. In its hand, it held a clipboard. The figure tilted its head slightly, then spoke in that same distorted voice. Officer Daniel Klein, it said calmly. You are interfering with scheduled events. Daniel tightened his grip on his weapon. What are you? The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly flipped a page on the clipboard. Daniel caught a glimpse of the document. It was a police report, stamped with tomorrow's date, and his photograph was printed under the word victim. Daniel's breathing stopped. The figure looked up again. You were not supposed to see this yet, it said quietly. Thomas began screaming behind him, struggling against the cuffs. He's early. He's early. That means the others are coming sooner. Daniel barely heard him. His entire world had narrowed to the clipboard, the report, the date, and the chilling realization forming in his mind. Someone, or something, inside this police station, was documenting murders before they happened. And according to the file, he was next. The watchman took one slow step forward. "Return to your assigned time, officer," it said calmly, "or the corrections will begin now." The lights went out, and Daniel Klein realized something horrifying. He wasn't investigating a crime. He was standing inside one that had already been written. The darkness swallowed the interrogation wing. Officer Daniel Klein stood frozen, pistol raised, heartbeat hammering so violently it blurred his vision. The last thing he saw before the lights died was the watchman stepping forward, calm, deliberate, as if time itself moved according to his schedule. Behind Daniel, Thomas Weller thrashed against the rusted cuffs. "Don't let him touch you," Thomas screamed. "If he marks you, you're locked into the record." Daniel backed toward the filing cabinet instinctively, his flashlight flickering to life in his shaking hand. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on the doorway where the watchman had stood. Empty. The hallway was silent again. Too silent. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears as he swept the light across the shattered observation mirror, broken glass glittering across the tile like frost. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. No indication that anything had stepped through. But the clipboard. Daniel knew he hadn't imagined that. "Where did he go?" Daniel whispered. Thomas shook his head violently, tears streaking down his face. "He doesn't leave," Thomas said. "He just moves where he's already supposed to be." Daniel frowned. "That doesn't mean anything." "It will," Thomas whispered. "When you open the cabinet." Daniel turned slowly toward the chained filing cabinet in the corner. The metal looked older than the building itself. Rust had eaten into the hinges, and the chain locking it shut was thick industrial steel. Something designed to keep prisoners in, or something else locked away. The label gleamed faintly in the flashlight beam. Cedar Hollow, cases, unsolved/unhappened. Daniel's throat tightened. "You said every crime is in there?" he asked. Thomas nodded slowly. "Not just crimes," he said. "Outcomes." Daniel stepped closer. "Who wrote them?" Thomas swallowed. "The watchman doesn't write them," he said quietly. "He records them." Daniel's stomach dropped. Daniel gripped the chain tightly and tugged. It didn't move. "Keys?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. There were never keys. Daniel stared at the lock mechanism. It wasn't traditional. Instead of a padlock, the chain threaded through a circular steel seal stamped with a date. Daniel leaned closer. The seal read, "Sealed December 14th, 2003. That date triggered a memory. "The Ashcroft incident," Daniel whispered. Thomas's breathing hitched. "You know about it?" "Only rumors," Daniel said. Entire interrogation wing shut down overnight. Files disappeared. Officer Ashcroft vanished during questioning of a suspect. Thomas laughed bitterly. "Vanished," he said. "That's what they told the public." Daniel's chest tightened. What actually happened? Thomas stared directly into his eyes. He opened the cabinet. The flashlight flickered violently. Daniel flinched as the beam dimmed, then surged back brighter than before. But something had changed. The seal on the cabinet chain was cracked. Daniel blinked. He hadn't touched it. Slowly, the steel disc split down the middle with a dull metallic snap. The chain slid loose and fell to the floor with a heavy clatter that echoed through the room. Thomas screamed. "No, that's not supposed to happen yet." Daniel stared at the cabinet doors as they creaked open by themselves. A cold gust of air rolled out, carrying the smell of old paper and damp concrete, mixed with something faintly electrical, like overheated wiring. Inside were hundreds of files, each labeled, each perfectly organized by date. Daniel hesitated, then reached inside. The first file he grabbed felt warm. That alone made his skin crawl. He opened it slowly. Case number 4412. Date, tomorrow, 9:42 p.m. Location, Cedar Hollow Train Depot. Daniel's eyes moved down the page. Victim, Maria Gutierrez, age 28. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Status, unsolved. Daniel's breath caught. Maria Gutierrez. He knew that name. She worked dispatch at the station. She had covered his shift 2 nights ago. He flipped through the file frantically. Crime scene photos. Police reports. Witness statements. Even forensic analysis. All dated tomorrow. Daniel slammed the folder shut. "This is impossible," he whispered. Thomas shook his head. He records the events after they happen somewhere else, Thomas said. Then they happen here. That makes no sense. It's Cedar Hollow, Thomas whispered. Nothing here makes sense. Daniel grabbed another file. This one felt colder, older. Dust puffed into the air as he opened it. Case number 0001. Date, August 7th, 1981. Victim count, 3. Status, origin event. Daniel's pulse quickened. Origin event. He flipped pages rapidly. The photos showed an abandoned surveillance room beneath the station, one that didn't exist in official blueprints. 3 bodies lay arranged around a desk, and sitting in the chair was a tall figure wearing a cracked security visor. The watchman. Daniel's hands trembled. 1981, he whispered. That's when it started? Thomas nodded. That's when Cedar Hollow stopped having random crimes, he said. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It means every crime after 1981 followed a pattern, Thomas said quietly. A schedule. Daniel felt ice crawl down his spine. You're saying murders are being planned? Thomas shook his head slowly. Not planned, he said. Documented. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slow. Measured. Daniel's flashlight swung toward the doorway. Nothing. Then the station intercom crackled to life overhead. A distorted voice filled the building. All officers returned to assigned time blocks. Daniel froze. What did that mean? Thomas's face drained of color. It means you've already changed something, he whispered. Daniel turned back to the cabinet. Several files were glowing faintly now. He pulled one out at random. The label made his stomach twist. Case number 9921. Date, November 16th, 2066. Daniel blinked. 40 years from now. He opened the file slowly, and immediately dropped it. Photos scattered across the floor. Crime scene tape surrounded a destroyed police station. Cedar Hollow reduced to burned ruins. Bodies covered in white sheets lined the parking lot. Daniel's eyes locked onto the suspect identification page. He felt the world tilt sideways. Primary suspect, Daniel Klein. Daniel staggered backward. That's not possible. Thomas stared at the photos. That means you survived the corrections, he whispered. What corrections? Thomas looked at him with hollow eyes. The watchman fixes broken timelines, he said. And when someone sees the records too early, he rewrites the ending. The hallway lights flickered back on suddenly. Daniel spun toward the door. The watchman stood there again. Closer this time. His clipboard was gone. Instead, he held a stamp. Heavy metal. Industrial. The word engraved across its base made Daniel's blood freeze. Confirmed. The watchman tilted his head slowly. You accessed restricted chronology, the distorted voice said calmly. Daniel raised his weapon. Stay back. The figure didn't react. Instead, he lifted the stamp slightly. Correction procedures must begin, he said. Thomas screamed. He's going to lock the events. Daniel grabbed the future file from the floor, shaking violently. You're wrong. Daniel shouted at the watchman. If I know what happens, I can stop it. The watchman's visor tilted slightly. You cannot stop documentation, he said calmly. You can only fulfill it. The lights flickered again. Suddenly, every file inside the cabinet burst open simultaneously, papers exploding into the air like a storm of future tragedies. Daniel ducked as photos, reports, and crime scene sketches swirled around him. Each page carried names, dates, deaths that hadn't happened yet. The watchman stepped forward through the chaos. You open the archive, he said quietly. Now the archive opens you. The stamp slammed down onto the interrogation table with a deafening metallic crack. The entire station trembled. Daniel felt something shift inside his mind, flashes of memories that weren't his. Crime scenes, sirens, blood-stained hallways, and one image that lingered longer than the rest. Himself, standing inside the ruins of Cedar Hollow Police Station, surrounded by bodies. The watchman extended one hand toward him. Return to assigned sequence, he commanded. Daniel's legs trembled. He didn't know why, but part of him wanted to obey. Behind him, Thomas screamed again. Don't listen. That's how he traps you into the timeline. Daniel clenched his fists. I'm not part of your record, Daniel said through gritted teeth. The watchman paused. For the first time, the figure seemed uncertain. That statement contradicts archived outcomes, he said slowly. Daniel stepped forward. Then maybe your archive is wrong. Silence filled the room. The watchman's visor cracked slightly, spreading a thin fracture across the plastic surface. Thomas gasped. You damaged him. The watchman took one slow step backward. Chronology instability detected, he said. Then the lights exploded again. Darkness swallowed the room, and when emergency lights flickered back on seconds later, the watchman was gone. The files lay scattered across the floor. The cabinet doors hung wide open, and Daniel Klein realized something far worse than the watchman's presence. Several files were missing, including the one labeled, Maria Gutierrez, tomorrow. Thomas stared at the empty cabinet in horror. That means the event is accelerating, he whispered. Daniel looked toward the station clock. It now read 3:41 a.m. The file had predicted the murder at 9:42 p.m. Less than 18 hours away. Daniel holstered his weapon slowly, eyes hardening with determination. Then we change it, he said. Thomas shook his head weakly. No one has ever changed one. Daniel grabbed his jacket. There's a first time for everything. Behind them, deep inside the cabinet, something metallic clicked. A new file slid forward by itself. Daniel turned slowly. The label read, Case number 4412, status updated. Daniel opened it with shaking hands. The victim section still read Maria Gutierrez, but beneath it, a new line had appeared. Secondary casualty, unknown police officer. Daniel felt ice settle in his veins, because under that line, a photograph was beginning to develop, and it looked exactly like him. The photograph was still developing. Officer Daniel Klein stared at the file in his shaking hands as the gray shadow of a face slowly darkened into recognizable features. The grainy image showed a body lying beside train tracks, partially covered by emergency blankets. And even though the picture wasn't fully clear yet, Daniel already knew it was him. He slammed the file shut. Behind him, Thomas Weller let out a low, defeated groan. It's happening faster, Thomas whispered. Once the watchman starts updating files manually, events compress. Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. Then we don't wait, he said. We find where this started. Thomas laughed weakly. You think he lives somewhere? Like an office? Daniel turned toward him. You said the first case was in 1981. Surveillance room under the station. Thomas nodded reluctantly. Daniel grabbed the origin file from the scattered papers across the floor and flipped through it again. The photos showed blueprints partially burned and stamped restricted access. But Daniel noticed something new. There were stairs in the photos. Concrete stairs leading downward from a hallway that didn't exist anymore. Where is this? Daniel demanded. Thomas swallowed. They sealed it after Ashcroft. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we unseal it. The eastern wing of Cedar Hollow Police Station was officially abandoned. Yellow hazard tape blocked the corridor leading toward the sealed interrogation rooms, but Daniel tore through it without hesitation. The air grew colder the deeper they walked. Thomas shuffled behind him, still cuffed. Daniel had unlocked him, but the man refused to leave the station. He won't let me go anyway, Thomas had said quietly. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting long, jittering shadows across peeling walls. The further they walked, the more Daniel noticed the architecture shifting. The walls looked older, concrete instead of drywall. The floor tiles changed from modern laminate to cracked black and white checkerboard patterns. Daniel stopped suddenly. This part of the station wasn't renovated with the rest, was it? Thomas shook his head slowly. They didn't renovate it, he said. They buried it. At the end of the hallway stood a steel security door. The words evidence storage, decommissioned, were barely visible beneath layers of peeling paint. Daniel tried the handle. Locked. Of course. But this lock wasn't electronic. It was mechanical. Old. Thomas stepped closer, staring at the door with visible dread. This is where Ashcroft disappeared, he whispered. Daniel glanced at him. What really happened to him? Thomas hesitated, then spoke quietly. He tried to arrest the watchman. Daniel blinked. That's impossible. He thought the watchman was human, Thomas said. He followed him down here after a suspect vanished during questioning. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his multi-tool. Then let's see what he found. The lock snapped after 30 seconds of prying. The door creaked open with a deep metallic groan that echoed through the hallway like something waking up after decades of sleep. A stairwell descended into darkness. Daniel shined his flashlight downward. Dust floated through the air in slow, drifting spirals. The concrete stairs were cracked, and old security cameras hung from the ceiling, their lenses shattered. Those cameras were active until 2003, Thomas whispered. After Ashcroft, they shut everything off. Daniel stepped onto the first stair. The air smelled damp and stale, like a flooded basement left to rot for years. Each step downward made Daniel's chest feel heavier, like gravity itself was thickening. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened into something massive. Rows of old surveillance monitors lined the walls, dozens of screens stacked in towering columns. Tangled wires spilled across the floor like dead vines. Daniel swept his flashlight across the room. Most monitors were cracked or dark, but one was glowing. Thomas froze. "No," he whispered. "It shouldn't still be running." Daniel approached the active monitor slowly. Static flickered across the screen, then cleared. It showed the police station lobby. Live. Daniel frowned. That camera system was replaced years ago. Thomas stepped closer, shaking. "That's not today's feed." Daniel squinted at the screen. The uniforms were wrong. Older. The patrol cars visible through the front glass were models discontinued decades ago. Daniel's stomach dropped. "This is 1981, he whispered. The monitor flickered again. The lobby camera zoomed suddenly, as if someone was manually controlling it. The image shifted toward the hallway leading to the interrogation wing, then toward the stairwell, then toward them. Daniel stumbled backward as the monitor displayed two figures standing in the underground surveillance room. Himself and Thomas, but they looked distorted, grainy, like recordings taken through cracked lenses. "They're watching us from the past," Thomas whispered. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. "That's not possible." Thomas pointed slowly toward the far wall. Daniel turned and saw a door. Not steel, not reinforced. Just an ordinary wooden office door. It had only one label. Archivist. Daniel felt a chill ripple down his spine. "The watchman doesn't create records," Thomas whispered again. Daniel stepped toward the door. "Then who does?" The door creaked open easily. Inside sat a tiny office frozen in time. Dust covered everything: filing trays, paperwork, rotary phone, broken desk lamp. But one thing stood out immediately. A tape recorder sat on the desk, and it was running. Daniel approached cautiously. The tape hissed softly before a voice crackled through the speaker. "This is Officer Leonard Ashcroft, case log entry December 14th, 2003. Thomas gasped. Daniel pressed closer. Ashcroft's voice sounded exhausted, terrified. "I've confirmed the entity is not the author," the recording continued. "It is only the enforcement mechanism. The records are created automatically, through predictive convergence tied to the station itself." Daniel frowned. "Predictive convergence?" The recording continued. "The building is generating the outcomes," Ashcroft whispered. "It started after the 1981 incident. Something embedded itself into the foundation. The watchman only ensures events follow the written path." Daniel felt his stomach twist. The tape crackled louder. "I tried to destroy the archive," Ashcroft said. "But when I removed one file, it replaced itself with 10 more." Thomas covered his mouth in horror. The recording ended with heavy breathing. Then Ashcroft whispered one final sentence. "If anyone finds this, burn the foundation. That's where it lives." The tape clicked off. Daniel turned slowly toward the floor. "Foundation?" Thomas shook his head violently. "No. No one's ever reached that level." Daniel frowned. "There's another level?" Thomas pointed toward a dark hallway behind the office. "There's a maintenance tunnel, sealed with concrete after Ashcroft vanished." Daniel's mind raced. If the station itself is creating the records, then stopping the watchman won't fix anything. Thomas stared at him. "Then what will?" Daniel grabbed his flashlight tighter. "We destroy whatever's writing them." They moved down the maintenance hallway cautiously. The air grew colder with every step, their breath fogging in front of them. Halfway down the corridor, Daniel stopped. Footprints covered the dust. Fresh, large, leading deeper into the tunnel. Thomas began trembling violently. "He's ahead of us," he whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "He always is." The tunnel ended at a massive concrete slab blocking the passage. Red letters were spray-painted across it. Sealed, by order of Chief Hartman, 2003. Daniel examined the edges of the slab. Cracks ran through the concrete, like something had been pushing from the other side for years. Then, a deep metallic clang echoed from beyond the wall. Thomas screamed. "That's the archive stabilizing." Daniel pressed his ear against the concrete. He heard something moving behind it, not walking, sliding, like heavy drawers opening endlessly, paper rustling, thousands of pages turning at once. And underneath it all, a low humming vibration that made Daniel's teeth ache. Suddenly, words began bleeding through the cracks in the concrete. Ink seeped outward, forming letters across the wall. Daniel stumbled back in horror as sentences formed directly onto the surface. Case number 4412, status, finalization in progress. Thomas collapsed to his knees. "No, Maria!" The wall cracked louder. More ink seeped through. Another line formed beneath the first. Secondary casualty confirmed. Daniel felt the floor tremble beneath his feet. Then the tunnel lights exploded in a shower of sparks. Emergency lights flickered on, and the watchman stood at the far end of the corridor, blocking their only exit. His visor was more cracked now, thin fractures spreading across the plastic like a spiderweb of stress. In his hand, the metal stamp again, but this time it was glowing faintly red. "Unauthorized excavation of chronology," the distorted voice announced calmly. Daniel stepped in front of Thomas instinctively. "You're not stopping us," Daniel said. The watchman tilted his head. "You misunderstand," he said quietly. "I am not stopping you." He raised the stamp slowly. "I am documenting you." The stamp slammed into the concrete floor. The entire tunnel shook violently as new words carved themselves across the slab wall behind Daniel. Case number 4412, final outcome approaching. The ground split slightly beneath their feet. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Daniel realized something horrifying. The station wasn't just predicting crimes. It was rewriting reality to match them. The watchman took one slow step closer. "Return to assigned ending," he said. Thomas sobbed behind Daniel. Once he stamps the file, the outcome becomes permanent. Daniel stared at the crumbling concrete slab, at the ink bleeding through, at the watchman approaching steadily. And for the first time, he understood the true scale of what he was fighting. Not a killer, not an entity, but a building that was writing the future. And it had already decided how this story ended. The tunnel shook violently as dust and small chunks of concrete rained from the ceiling. Officer Daniel Klein stood frozen, staring at the slab wall as ink continued bleeding through the cracks like veins forming across stone. Words carved themselves deeper, darker, more permanent. Case number 4412, final outcome approaching. Behind him, Thomas Weller sobbed quietly, clutching his head like he was trying to block out something only he could hear. The watchman stood at the end of the corridor, silent and unmoving, his cracked visor reflecting the flickering emergency lights. The glowing metal stamp in his hand hummed faintly, pulsing with a dull red glow. Daniel's instincts screamed that if the stamp touched anything again, the timeline would lock permanently. "You're not sealing anything," Daniel said, forcing steel into his voice. The watchman tilted his head slowly. "Chronology cannot remain unstable," the distorted voice replied calmly. "Correction must occur." Daniel turned toward the slab wall again. The cracks were widening. More ink seeped through, forming new lines of text. Primary event confirmed. Train depot homicide. Thomas choked back a sob. "She's already dead in their record," he whispered. "We're running out of time." Daniel's jaw tightened. "No," he said firmly. "If Ashcroft was right, the Foundation is writing this. That means if we destroy the source, the record collapses." Thomas stared at him with hollow eyes. "No one's ever reached it," he whispered. Daniel stepped toward the slab. "Then we will." He grabbed a fallen steel pipe from the floor and slammed it against the concrete. The impact echoed like a gunshot through the tunnel. Cracks spread further across the slab. Behind him, the watchman stepped forward. "One final warning," the entity said quietly. Daniel swung again. Concrete chipped loose, revealing a thin hollow behind the wall. A cold, unnatural wind rushed through the opening, carrying the smell of wet earth and something metallic, like rust and ink mixed together. Thomas screamed. "You're breaking containment." Daniel struck again, widening the hole until a large chunk of the slab collapsed inward. Darkness stretched beyond the opening, but not empty darkness. Something moved inside. Not alive. Not dead. Just shifting. Daniel shined his flashlight through the opening and felt his breath stop. Beyond the slab was not another room. It was a massive underground chamber carved directly into bedrock. The walls were lined with shelves stretching into the darkness, thousands of them, each holding stacks of files, folders, and loose pages arranged with terrifying precision. The air hummed with low vibration. Every few seconds, new pages slid out of narrow slits carved into the stone walls, fluttering down and organizing themselves into folders automatically. Daniel stepped inside slowly. This is impossible. Thomas followed hesitantly, trembling violently. This is where they come from, he whispered. The real archive. Daniel moved deeper into the chamber, flashlight sweeping across endless rows of documents. Dates were stamped across every folder, some labeled centuries ago, others marked decades into the future. The deeper Daniel walked, the older the files became. He stopped suddenly in front of a stone pedestal at the center of the chamber. A single file sat on top. Unlike the others, it was bound in cracked leather instead of paper. Dust coated its surface like it had been untouched for centuries. Daniel reached out slowly. The title carved into the cover made his heart stop. Cedar Hollow, founding record. Thomas gasped. That shouldn't exist, he whispered. Daniel opened the file carefully. The first page contained a hand-drawn map of the region, but it wasn't Cedar Hollow. The land was labeled something older. Blackridge Settlement, 1764. Daniel flipped the page. Sketches showed early settlers building structures along the ridge, including the original foundation of what would later become the police station. And beneath the drawings, he found something horrifying. Blueprints of an underground chamber identical to the one they were standing in. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. The town was built around the archive, he whispered. Daniel flipped another page. A handwritten journal entry stared back at him. We discovered the stone beneath the ridge hums with knowledge. It reveals outcomes before actions occur. The settlers believe it is divine providence. We believe it is something else. We will build our governance center atop it to harness its predictive power. Daniel's throat went dry. They built the station here on purpose. Thomas stared at the endless shelves around them. They built the entire town here on purpose, he said. A low rumble shook the chamber. Daniel turned. The watchman stepped through the broken slab entrance, descending slowly into the archive chamber. His presence made the shelves vibrate slightly, papers rustling like frightened birds. Archive breach confirmed, the watchman said calmly. Daniel stepped protectively in front of the founding file. You're enforcing something that shouldn't exist, he said. The watchman paused. I enforce documented chronology. Daniel held up the file. This place started as an experiment. The town trapped itself inside a predictive system. You're protecting a curse. The watchman's visor flickered faintly. Curse is a subjective designation. Thomas whispered behind him, voice trembling. He doesn't care about morality. Only sequence. Daniel flipped further through the founding file desperately. Another entry caught his eye. We have begun carving conduits through the bedrock to allow the stone to document events directly. However, it has begun predicting not only crime, but tragedy. Natural disasters. Deaths. Accidents. The archive grows faster than we can contain. Daniel's chest tightened. Another entry followed. We attempted to seal the chamber, but the stone continued generating records through the building's foundation. The archivist claims the stone has awareness. We believe he has gone mad. Thomas whispered softly. Archivist. Daniel flipped the page again. A charcoal sketch appeared. A tall man wearing early colonial clothing stood beside the stone pedestal, holding stacks of papers. Underneath the drawing, Elias Crowther, first archivist, 1768. Daniel felt ice crawl through his veins. They assigned someone to maintain it, he whispered. Thomas shook his head slowly. Not maintain, he said. Interpret. The ground trembled again. Shelves began rattling violently. Papers burst from the walls faster now, fluttering chaotically through the chamber like a blizzard of future tragedies. The watchman stepped closer. Unauthorized access to founding record requires correction, he said. Daniel backed toward the pedestal instinctively. You said you enforced the archive, Daniel said. Then who enforces you? The watchman paused. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. Daniel pressed forward. The archivist created the system, he said. That means someone had to create you. The watchman's visor cracked slightly deeper. I am assigned to enforce continuity, he said slowly. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Assigned by who? Silence. The shelves around them vibrated violently. Pages flew through the air in chaotic spirals, forming loose stacks around Daniel's feet. Then something impossible happened. A new page slid out of the stone wall, glowing faintly gold instead of white. It drifted down slowly and landed on the pedestal beside the founding file. Daniel picked it up cautiously. His breath caught immediately. The document wasn't a crime report. It was a personnel record. Archivist succession log. Daniel flipped through it. Names stretched across centuries, each archivist assigned to interpret and oversee the predictive stone. But near the bottom of the page, several entries were scratched out violently, as if erased from history. The final visible name stopped Daniel's heart. Current archivist, status, active. The name was missing. Completely blank. Thomas stepped closer, voice shaking. That means someone is still controlling it. The watchman stepped forward suddenly, raising the glowing stamp. Archivist clearance is restricted, he said. Daniel backed away, gripping the succession log. If the archivist is still active, then this whole thing can be stopped. The watchman tilted his head slowly. Archivist identity classified under Foundation protocols. Daniel stared at him. You don't know who it is, do you? The watchman's visor fractured further, thin cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. Archivist identity is irrelevant to enforcement, he said. Thomas whispered behind Daniel, horrified. That means even the watchman answers to someone. Suddenly, the entire chamber shook violently. Stone cracked overhead. Shelves collapsed. Thousands of files spilled across the floor, like waves of paper drowning the chamber. Ink began bleeding from the bedrock itself, forming massive words across the chamber floor. Case number 4412. Termination sequence initiated. Thomas screamed. Daniel stared at the writing, panic rising in his chest. Termination sequence? The watchman lowered the stamp slowly. Chronology corruption exceeds containment, he said calmly. System is initiating timeline purge. Daniel's blood turned to ice. What does that mean? The watchman turned toward him slowly. It means the archive will remove unstable elements, he said. Thomas collapsed to his knees, sobbing. That means the town, he whispered. Daniel stared around the collapsing chamber, at shelves disintegrating, at files burning themselves into black ash. You're saying it's going to erase Cedar Hollow? The watchman's voice remained calm. Correction ensures chronological stability. Daniel clenched the succession log tightly in his hand. Then he realized something horrifying. If the archivist was still alive, they might be the only person capable of stopping the purge. And somewhere inside the station, they were still working. The emergency lights inside Blackridge Broadcast Station flickered like a dying heartbeat as Detective Elena Voss stepped deeper into the basement archives. The air smelled stale, metallic, and strangely sweet, like rotting paper mixed with antiseptic. Behind her, Officer Daniel Reeves kept his flashlight steady, though his hand trembled slightly. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy, as if the building itself was listening. They had followed the hidden tunnel beneath Studio B for nearly 40 feet before it opened into a narrow corridor lined with concrete walls. The tunnel had not appeared on any architectural blueprints of the station. Not the originals from 1978. Not the renovation plans from 1996. Not even the digital floor maps from last year. And yet, it existed. Someone built this intentionally, Reeves whispered. Elena ran her fingers across the wall. The concrete was smoother here. Newer. Not just built, she said quietly. Maintained. They reached the end of the corridor. A metal door stood in front of them. No handle. No hinges visible from the outside. Only a small numeric keypad glowing faintly green. Reeves frowned. You think it's still active? Elena didn't answer immediately. She pulled out the folded page they had recovered from Martha Klein's personal locker. The one containing rows of handwritten numbers scribbled between fragments of broadcast timestamps. She stared at the final sequence. 7 to 3, 1 to 9. Her pulse quickened. "You ready?" she asked. Reeves swallowed. Not even close. She entered the numbers. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then, a low mechanical click echoed through the corridor. The door slid open just enough for them to see darkness inside. And something else. The faint glow of old analog equipment. The archive chamber. Their flashlights swept across the hidden room. Rows of towering metal shelves stretched across the chamber, stacked with tape reels, VHS cassettes, audio spools, and sealed storage boxes labeled with broadcast dates spanning nearly 40 years. It was an underground archive, but not one maintained by the station's official catalog. "This isn't storage," Reeves murmured. "No," Elena said slowly. "It's a record." They stepped inside. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the door slid shut behind them. Reeves spun around, grabbing the handle that wasn't there. "Elena, relax," she said, though her own heartbeat had accelerated. If someone wanted us trapped, they wouldn't have left the keypad outside. She hoped she believed that. They moved deeper into the chamber. Every shelf was organized chronologically. Each tape was marked with a broadcast date, and sometimes a second handwritten time beside it. Elena stopped at a reel labeled October 14th, 1983, 11:47 p.m. Her chest tightened. "That's the night of the first disappearance," she said. Reeves nodded slowly. "Thomas Garner," he recalled. "The security guard who vanished during a late shift." Elena removed the reel carefully. The tape felt warm. Not physically warm, but heavy, charged with an unsettling weight that made her palms sweat. Across the room, Reeves had found an old playback console wired into a cluster of aging CRT monitors stacked 3 rows high. "Still has power," he said, flipping a switch. The monitors crackled to life with a hiss of static. Elena inserted the reel. The tape began to spin. The lost broadcast. At first, the screen showed familiar footage. Late-night programming from 1983. Commercial breaks. Weather alerts. Public service announcements. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the footage glitched. The picture distorted. Audio warped into a low, droning hum. And the screen turned black. For 3 seconds, nothing appeared. Then a silhouette emerged. A figure sitting in a chair, facing away from the camera. Long hair obscured the face. The lighting flickered behind them, casting jagged shadows across the room. Reeves leaned closer. "Is that?" Elena nodded. "Thomas Garner." The figure slowly raised its head, not turning toward the camera, just tilting upward as if listening to something above. Then came the whisper. The same voice heard in the cursed broadcast. Soft, echoing, layered with unnatural distortion. The signal must continue. The silhouette stood, walked forward, and vanished off camera. The screen cut to static again. Reeves stepped back. Jesus! But Elena wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was staring at the timestamp, because the footage resumed normal programming at 11:49 p.m. 2 minutes missing. 2 minutes unaccounted for. The pattern. They spent the next hour pulling reels from different decades. Every single disappearance connected to Blackridge Station had one thing in common. A missing segment in the broadcast schedule. Always 2 minutes long. Always replaced with static or distorted noise. And always followed by a recorded appearance of the victim somewhere inside the building, captured by studio cameras that should not have been recording. They weren't just disappearing, Reeves whispered. Elena nodded slowly. They were being archived. Her stomach turned as the realization settled in. Whoever, or whatever, was behind the signal wasn't killing randomly. It was collecting, documenting, preserving, like specimens. The ledger. Near the back wall, Elena discovered a locked glass cabinet containing several leather-bound notebooks. She shattered the glass using the butt of her service pistol. Inside, she pulled out the oldest ledger. The cover was cracked with age, stamped with the station's original logo. She opened it. The first page was dated January 1978, the year Blackridge Broadcast Station began operating. The handwriting inside was elegant, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Each page listed names, dates, times, and a single recurring phrase written beside every entry. Transmitted. Elena flipped faster. The list spanned decades, hundreds of names. Her throat tightened when she reached the most recent page. The last recorded entry was dated 3 nights ago. Name: Martha Klein. Status: transmitted, partial. Reeves exhaled sharply. Partial? Elena didn't respond. She kept reading. Below Martha's name was another entry, written in fresh ink. Still wet. She froze. Reeves noticed her expression. What is it? Elena turned the book toward him. 2 new names stared back from the page. Elena Voss. Daniel Reeves. Status: blank. The hidden camera. The overhead lights inside the chamber suddenly flickered, then dimmed, then shifted from emergency red to a cold, sterile white. Reeves slowly turned toward the ceiling. Elena, look. A small camera lens protruded from the corner of the room. It hadn't been there before. At least, they hadn't noticed it. A soft mechanical whir echoed as it rotated toward them. And then, the monitors behind them turned on by themselves. Live feed, showing them standing inside the archive chamber. Reeves stepped backward. They're recording us. Elena stared at the screens, noticing something else. The timestamp in the corner of the footage was counting down. 1:59, 1:58, 1:57. Her blood ran cold. 2 minutes, she whispered. Reeves followed her gaze. Is that a timer? The whisper returned through the room's overhead speakers. Louder now. Clearer. Layered with dozens of overlapping voices. The signal must continue. The voice behind the signal. The lights dimmed again. The monitors flickered violently. And then, every screen displayed the same image. A control room. Old. Dust-covered. Filled with analog broadcast equipment that predated the station's original layout. At the center of the room sat a single figure, facing directly toward the camera. For the first time, the watcher revealed its face. Or what remained of it. The skin appeared stretched unnatural, as if aged far beyond human limits. Eyes sunken yet glowing faintly with reflected studio light. Long strands of gray hair clung to hollow cheeks. It smiled, not with warmth, not with emotion, with purpose. Elena Voss, the figure said calmly. Its voice was no longer distorted. It sounded ancient, measured, and horrifyingly human. You have followed the signal farther than any investigator before you. Reeves grabbed his weapon. Who the hell are you? The figure ignored him. Its gaze remained locked on Elena. I am the custodian of transmission, it said softly. The first voice that Blackridge ever carried, and the last voice it will ever silence. Elena forced herself to speak. You're responsible for the disappearances. The custodian tilted its head. Not disappearances. It gestured around the room displayed on the monitors. Preservation. The origin begins to unravel. The monitors shifted again, displaying archival footage from 1977. Construction workers inside the unfinished broadcast station. They uncovered something beneath the foundation. A sealed concrete vault. Inside it, old recording equipment predating modern broadcasting technology. Reeves frowned. That station wasn't built there by accident, he murmured. The custodian continued speaking through the speakers. Blackridge was built atop a forgotten relay system, one designed to capture voices not meant to be heard by the living. Elena felt her breath catch. You turned it into a trap. No, the custodian said calmly. It was always a trap. I merely learned how to control it. The timer on the monitor dropped to 0:47. The first trap. Suddenly, the chamber floor vibrated. A deep mechanical rumble echoed beneath their feet. Shelves began shifting along hidden tracks. Tape reels fell, scattering across the floor. Reeves grabbed Elena's arm. We need to get out. Now. She ran toward the door keypad. The screen flashed red. Access locked during transmission. The timer hit 0:32. The whispering voices grew louder, layering into a deafening chorus filling the chamber. Reeves slammed his fist against the metal door. It's sealing us in. Elena scanned the room desperately. Her eyes landed on the playback console. An idea sparked. If the signal traps victims through broadcast, she said quickly, maybe we can interrupt the transmission. Reeves nodded. Tell me what to do. She pointed to the console's wiring. Pull the main audio relay when I say. He hesitated. That could fry the entire system. Exactly. The countdown. 0:18. The monitors flashed with rapid images of past victims appearing inside the station, walking toward unseen doors, vanishing into static. The custodian's voice softened. You cannot stop preservation, detective. Every voice deserves to be remembered. Elena clenched her jaw. Not like this. 009. She slammed a cassette into the playback deck, Martha Klein's final recording. Her voice filled the chamber. If you find this, don't listen to the signal. It feeds on attention. Silence is the only way to weaken it. Elena looked at Reeves. Now. He yanked the relay cables free. The collapse. Sparks erupted from the console. The monitors exploded into white noise. The whispering voices screamed, distorted, furious, collapsing into static. The chamber lights burst, plunging the room into darkness. And the door behind them slid open with a violent metallic shriek. Reeves grabbed Elena's hand. Move. They sprinted through the corridor as alarms began blaring throughout the station above them. Behind them, the archive chamber collapsed into darkness. But just before the door sealed shut, Elena heard the custodian's voice one last time. Calm. Unshaken. You have delayed transmission. Detective Voss. A pause. Then, but you have already been recorded. Marcus Hale is from prior story. Here it's Elena Voss, fine. The emergency sirens inside Blackridge Broadcast Station howled like wounded animals as Detective Elena Voss and Officer Daniel Reeves burst out of the hidden corridor and stumbled back into the main archive basement. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere above them, heavy machinery roared to life, equipment activating that neither of them had touched. Reeves slammed the steel maintenance hatch shut behind them, twisting the wheel lock with shaking hands. Tell me that stopped it, he said, breathless. Elena didn't answer, because she knew it hadn't. The overhead speakers crackled. Static spilled into the room, followed by the faint echo of layered whispers, quieter now, but still alive. The signal must continue. Reeves slowly turned toward the stairwell leading back upstairs. Did you hear that? I did, Elena said grimly. And that means we only interrupted it, not killed it. They rushed upstairs toward Studio B, boots pounding across the concrete steps. As they reached the station's main hallway, every overhead television screen mounted along the corridor flickered on simultaneously. Reeves froze mid-step. Elena. She turned. Every screen displayed the same image. Live city traffic cameras, security cameras, apartment surveillance feeds. And then, the feeds began switching rapidly, cycling through homes across Blackridge City. Living rooms, bedrooms, hospital waiting areas, restaurants, dozens of screens, hundreds of viewers, all unknowingly broadcasting into the station system. Elena's chest tightened. It's hijacking outside signals. Reeves stared, horrified. You're saying the signal isn't trapped inside the station anymore? Elena swallowed. I'm saying, it just found a way to spread. Elena's phone vibrated violently in her pocket. She answered instantly. Voss. Captain Harold Dunn's voice exploded through the line. Where the hell are you? At Blackridge Station. Why? You need to turn on Channel 7 right now. Elena grabbed the nearest control monitor and switched to the local broadcast frequency. The screen glitched twice, then stabilized. A familiar emergency alert banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Reeves stared at her. They're warning people not to watch it. The screen flickered again, and suddenly, the emergency alert vanished, replaced by a live broadcast feed from inside Blackridge Station itself. Elena's breath stopped. The camera angle showed Studio B. Empty, lights flickering, dust drifting through the air. And then, footsteps echoed through the studio. Reeves whispered, Please tell me that's not Liv. Elena checked the timestamp. It was. The studio camera slowly panned toward the center stage. And there, standing beneath the overhead spotlight, was a man in hospital scrubs. He looked disoriented, lost. His eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking. Reeves leaned closer. I know that guy. Elena looked at him sharply. From where? Blackridge Medical Center. Missing patient. Psychiatric ward. He vanished 2 nights ago. The man opened his mouth and spoke in a monotone voice. The signal calls, and I answer. The broadcast cut abruptly to static. Reeves staggered backward. You saw that? That wasn't a recording. That was live. Elena nodded slowly. And if he's alive, then the others might be too. Elena's phone buzzed again. A text message. Unknown number. She opened it. Check internal police archive. Case file. 1978/BRX01. Reeves leaned over her shoulder. Who sent that? No idea. But they know we're investigating. They exchanged a tense glance. Without another word, Elena dialed into the department's encrypted database using her secure tablet. The archive loaded. Case file BRX01. The first disappearance tied to Blackridge Station. Thomas Garner. Security guard. But something was wrong. Large sections of the file were redacted. Internal police redactions. Not federal. Not legal. Departmental. Reeves frowned. Why would our own department seal this? Elena scrolled deeper. Then she froze. At the bottom of the file was an authorization signature. Captain Harold Dunn. The betrayal. Reeves stared at the name. You've got to be kidding me. Elena felt her pulse spike. Dunn has been head of internal investigations for 20 years, she said quietly. Reeves nodded slowly. That means every signal-related disappearance passed through him. Elena clenched her jaw, or was buried by him. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Dunn calling. They both stared at the screen. Reeves whispered, "You gonna answer that?" Elena inhaled slowly, then pressed accept. "Captain." Dunn's voice was calm. Too calm. "You and Reeves need to leave that station immediately." "Why?" she asked. "Because backup units are en route, and you're interfering with a classified containment operation." Elena's eyes narrowed. Containment or concealment? Silence hung on the line for 3 seconds. Then Dunn spoke quietly. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "No," Elena replied coldly. "But I'm starting to understand who's been protecting it." The line went dead. Reeves' phone suddenly buzzed. He frowned. "That's weird." "What?" He held up the screen. A video file had appeared via airdrop. No sender ID. No file name. Only a timestamp. Tonight, 11:59 p.m. He opened it. The footage showed a dimly lit room. A single chair. And someone tied to it. Their face bruised. Eyes terrified. Elena leaned closer. Her stomach dropped. Martha Klein. Reeves' breathing grew heavy. "She's alive." The recording shifted. The camera zoomed toward Martha. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "If anyone sees this, the signal doesn't kill immediately. It stores you, keeps you alive, until the full transmission is complete." Elena whispered, "Full transmission." Martha's eyes suddenly darted toward something off camera. Her expression filled with horror. "They're coming. The custodian doesn't work alone. There are others inside the system, watching viewers, selecting who gets archived next." The video cut. Every monitor inside the station suddenly lit up again. But this time, they weren't showing random surveillance feeds. They were showing social media live streams, news broadcasts, streaming services, video calls, anything transmitting video across Blackridge City. Reeves backed toward the wall. "It's piggybacking onto every broadcast frequency." Elena whispered, "It's turning the entire city into a receiver." The speakers crackled again. The custodian's voice echoed softly through the building. "Expansion is inevitable. Transmission evolves with technology." Elena stepped toward the nearest microphone panel. "You're losing control," she shouted. The voice chuckled. "No, Detective Voss. I am gaining reach." Reeves pulled out his tablet and opened local emergency news feeds. His face drained of color. "Elena, look at this." He handed her the screen. Reports were flooding in across the city. Viewers reporting, voices whispering through televisions. Streaming platforms crashing with static loops. Emergency services receiving calls from residents claiming their screens were showing unknown faces staring back at them. 3 new disappearances reported in the last hour. Elena's stomach twisted. "It's accelerating." Reeves nodded grimly. "And it's not random anymore." He zoomed into one report. Each missing person had one thing in common. They had all watched Channel 7 earlier that night. Suddenly, every screen inside the station changed simultaneously. The same black background appeared. White numbers faded into view. 59 minutes and 59 seconds. Reeves whispered, "That's not 2 minutes." The custodian's voice returned. "Midnight marks a new transmission cycle, one designed for mass preservation. Elena stepped closer to the screen. What happens at 0? The custodian answered calmly. Blackridge becomes the first city fully recorded. Reeves ran a quick network trace on the broadcast signal. His eyes widened. Elena, it's not just using the station's transmitter. Then what? He turned the tablet toward her. The signal was routing through police emergency communication towers, the hospital broadcast networks, city surveillance infrastructure, personal mobile devices connected to public Wi-Fi. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone gave it access to the entire city grid. Reeves swallowed. And the only person with clearance for all those systems. They both spoke at the same time. Captain Dunn. The station lights flickered violently. The countdown timer dropped to 57 minutes and 12 seconds. Reeves grabbed his jacket. We need to find Dunn. Now. Elena nodded. Not just Dunn. She looked back at the screens filled with flickering faces of the city. We need to find the source of the signal before midnight, or every person watching a screen in Blackridge becomes part of its archive. As they rushed toward the station exit, the custodian's whisper followed them through the speakers, almost amused, almost patient. You chase answers, but transmission has already begun. The countdown continued. And somewhere inside the city, hundreds of televisions flickered on by themselves. Rain hammered against the windshield as Detective Elena Voss sped through downtown Blackridge, red and blue lights from her unmarked cruiser slicing through the midnight haze. The city looked restless, electric, like something unseen was vibrating beneath the surface. Beside her, Officer Daniel Reeves worked furiously on his tablet, fingers flying across the screen as he traced the expanding signal routes hijacking the city's communication grid. Timer's down to 51 minutes, Reeves muttered. Elena tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Keep tracking Dunn. I am, Reeves said. But he's ghosting every department locator. Either he shut off his badge, or someone shut it off for him. Elena exhaled slowly. Then we find him the old-fashioned way. Dunn's empty office. 10 minutes later, they burst through the doors of Blackridge Police Headquarters. The night shift desk officer looked up in surprise as Elena flashed her badge and headed straight toward the restricted executive floor. Dunn's office sat at the end of a dim hallway. The door was unlocked. That alone sent a chill down Elena's spine. She pushed it open slowly. Inside, the office was immaculate. Too immaculate. Papers neatly stacked. Desk cleared except for a single-framed photograph of Dunn standing beside the original Blackridge broadcast station crew in 1978. Reeves stepped closer to the photo. Look at this. Elena leaned in. Her stomach dropped. Standing beside Dunn in the photo, wearing a technician's uniform, was a younger version of the custodian. The same hollow eyes. The same faint, unsettling smile. Dunn knew him, Reeves whispered. Not just knew, Elena said quietly. They built the station together. The hidden drawer. Elena searched Dunn's desk quickly, sliding open drawers with practiced efficiency. Most contained harmless paperwork, until she reached the bottom drawer. Locked. Reeves pulled out a small toolkit from his jacket. Give me 10 seconds. 9 seconds later, the drawer clicked open. Inside lay a thick folder stamped with a red internal classification label. Project Relay, authorized personnel only. Elena flipped it open. Blueprints spilled out across the desk. Not of Blackridge Station, but of something else. A second broadcast tower, located beneath the city's abandoned subway line. Reeves leaned over the plans. That rail system's been shut down since the 90s. Elena scanned the schematics. Not completely. Her finger traced the wiring diagrams. The second tower connected directly into the city's emergency infrastructure, feeding power into Blackridge Station as a backup relay. It's amplifying the signal, Reeves said. And if the custodian controls both towers, Elena finished grimly, he controls every broadcast frequency in Blackridge. Martha's final message. Reeves' tablet suddenly beeped. He frowned. I'm receiving another file. From Martha? Elena asked. Same unknown sender. He opened it. This time it wasn't video. It was audio. Static crackled before Martha Klein's exhausted voice emerged. If you found the second tower, you're close. The custodian cannot transmit fully unless both towers synchronize. But there's a flaw, The relay core inside the underground tower still runs on analog control circuits. Overload the frequency converter, and you'll force the system into reboot. Elena felt hope flicker. Reboot means shut down? Reeves shook his head slowly. Temporary blackout. Maybe 10 minutes, if we're lucky. Martha's voice returned, weaker. 10 minutes might be enough to reach the custodian. He hides where the signal began, beneath studio, A not B. The recording ended abruptly. Reeves swallowed. She risked everything to get that message out. Elena nodded. And now we have exactly one shot. The race underground. 20 minutes later, Elena's cruiser screeched to a halt outside a rusted subway entrance, sealed off with city barricades and faded hazard signs. Rainwater poured down the concrete steps, leading underground. Reeves checked the timer. 34 minutes and 8 seconds. We're running out of time, he said. Elena grabbed a crowbar from the trunk and forced open the rusted security gate. The metal screamed in protest before snapping loose. They descended into darkness. Their flashlights illuminated crumbling tile walls covered in graffiti and decades of neglect. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing through the abandoned tunnels like distant footsteps. Reeves followed the blueprint map on his tablet. Relay tower should be 300 meters ahead past platform 2. They moved quickly but cautiously. The deeper they went, the stronger the static interference became. Their radios crackled. Their flashlights flickered intermittently, and faint whispers began leaking through the air, barely audible, but unmistakable. The forgotten platform. They reached platform 2. The station clock mounted on the wall had stopped permanently at 11:59 p.m. Elena stared at it. That can't be coincidence. Reeves pointed toward a maintenance tunnel at the far end. Tower access should be through there. As they approached, Elena noticed something that made her freeze. Footprints. Fresh. Dozens of them. Leading into the tunnel. Reeves saw them too. We're not alone. The custodian's followers. They moved slowly into the tunnel. The whispers grew louder, forming faint human murmurs layered over each other like overlapping radio frequencies. Then, movement ahead. Figures stepped out of the darkness. 5 people, all missing persons from signal-related cases. Their faces pale, eyes vacant, expressions calm, almost peaceful. Reeves whispered, "They're alive." But the way they moved, slow, synchronized, almost mechanical, sent dread crawling up Elena's spine. One of them stepped forward, a middle-aged woman Elena recognized from an unsolved disappearance 2 years earlier. Her lips moved in perfect monotone. The custodian protects memory. You will not interrupt transmission. Reeves raised his weapon reluctantly. Elena, I can't shoot them. She shook her head. You won't have to. She stepped forward cautiously. We're here to stop the signal, she said firmly. You don't have to do this. The woman tilted her head. The signal is peace. The signal removes fear. The signal removes pain. Behind her, the group moved closer in unison. Reeves whispered urgently, "They're blocking the tunnel." Elena glanced around quickly, then spotted an emergency power box mounted along the wall. "Cover me," she said. Before Reeves could respond, she sprinted toward it and slammed the breaker switch downward. The tunnel lights exploded into blinding white illumination. The group staggered backward, shielding their eyes, their synchronized movement breaking apart in confusion. "Move!" Elena shouted. They rushed past them and deeper into the maintenance tunnel. Behind them, the whispers turned into frantic, overlapping voices, almost screaming. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Reeves stopped dead in his tracks. Holy! At the center of the chamber stood the second relay tower. It rose nearly 4 stories tall, surrounded by analog broadcast equipment humming with unnatural intensity. Thick cables ran across the ceiling, connecting into the city's power grid. And at the base of the tower, Captain Harold Dunn stood waiting. The confrontation. Elena raised her weapon. "Step away from the controls, Dunn." He turned slowly, rainwater dripping from his coat as if he'd been standing there for hours. His expression wasn't panicked. It was resigned. "You shouldn't have come here, Elena." "You've been helping him," she said coldly. Dunn sighed. "I've been containing him." Reeves scoffed. "By feeding him victims?" Dunn's eyes darkened. "You don't understand what the signal is capable of. If it loses containment, it won't just archive Blackridge. It could spread worldwide. Elena stepped closer. And your solution was to sacrifice people to keep it stable. Dunn's voice cracked slightly. It demanded minimal transmissions. Small numbers controlled selection to prevent full activation. Reeves stared at him in disbelief. You made deals with it. Dunn whispered. I made bargains to save millions. The countdown nears. Reeves checked the timer. 21 minutes and 55 seconds. Elena, we're out of time. She looked back at Dunn. Step aside. Dunn shook his head slowly. If you shut down this tower, the custodian will activate emergency transmission protocols. You'll accelerate the process. Elena's voice hardened. And if we do nothing, the city dies anyway. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Dunn lowered his weapon. Then God help us all, he whispered. The overload. Reeves rushed toward the analog converter core at the tower's base, pulling open access panels and exposing tangled circuitry. Elena, I need 60 seconds to rig the overload. She nodded, standing guard as Dunn watched helplessly. Above them, the tower began vibrating as if reacting to their presence. The whispers returned, louder, angrier, echoing through the chamber. The custodian's voice erupted through overhead speakers. You fracture preservation. You risk eternal silence. Elena shouted upward. I'd rather risk silence than eternal imprisonment. Reeves yelled, 30 seconds. The tower lights surged violently. Electric arcs crackled across the cables overhead. The timer dropped to 19 minutes and 12 seconds. Reeves slammed the final switch into place. The tower screamed with overloaded feedback, lights flickering between blinding white and complete darkness. He looked at Elena. Once I trigger this, we have 10 minutes before the system reboots. Elena nodded. 10 minutes is all we need. She turned toward the exit tunnel leading back to the surface, and ultimately toward Studio A, where the custodian was waiting. Behind them, Dunn whispered one final warning. If you reach him, you won't just be fighting a man anymore. You'll be fighting the signal itself. The countdown continued. The tower trembled violently. And far above them, inside Blackridge Broadcast Station, every television screen in the city flickered simultaneously. The relay tower screamed. A deafening mechanical howl tore through the underground chamber as Reeves slammed the overload switch into position. Sparks exploded across the converter core, showering the floor in arcs of electric fire. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning insulation. The entire structure trembled violently. Reeves grabbed Elena's arm. That's it. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the system reboots. Above them, the tower lights surged wildly, flickering between blinding white and pitch darkness like a dying heartbeat. The whispers echoing through the chamber rose into a furious chorus, layered voices overlapping in panic and rage. The custodian's voice erupted through the overhead speakers, no longer calm, no longer patient. You fracture preservation. You fracture memory. You fracture eternity. Elena stepped backward toward the tunnel exit, her weapon raised toward the vibrating tower. Good, she said coldly. Let it break. Behind them, Captain Dunn leaned heavily against a control console, sweat pouring down his face as he watched the overload spread through the system. You don't understand what you've done, he whispered hoarsely. Elena didn't turn around. No, she said. I understand exactly what we're about to stop. The city goes dark. The moment they reached the subway tunnel, every light inside the chamber exploded simultaneously. Darkness swallowed them. Then, a distant ripple of electrical collapse echoed through the tunnels like rolling thunder. Reeves checked his tablet. The network map flickered. One by one, city power grids blinked offline. Streetlights died. Traffic signals shut down. Emergency systems failed. Blackridge City went completely dark. Reeves exhaled sharply. Blackout confirmed. That overload hit everything connected to the signal. Elena pulled out her flashlight. Then the custodian just lost his eyes. Reeves shook his head slowly. Or he just switched to listening. The silence begins. As they climbed out of the abandoned subway entrance and emerged onto rain-soaked streets, an eerie stillness blanketed the city. No neon lights. No television glow through apartment windows. No traffic noise. Just rain falling steadily onto empty sidewalks. Elena had worked homicide for 12 years. She had never seen a city this silent. Reeves whispered, almost afraid to break it. Feels wrong. It is wrong, Elena said quietly. And it won't last. She checked her watch. 9 minutes left. The storming of Studio A. They sped back toward Blackridge Broadcast Station, using emergency headlights alone. The building loomed against the storm clouds like a skeletal monument, dark, powerless, and waiting. When they stepped inside, the station was almost completely black. Except for one thing. A faint, pulsing glow seeped from the far end of the hallway. Studio A. Reeves swallowed. That's impossible. The power grid's down. Elena tightened her grip on her weapon. Not if he's running on independent transmission. They moved slowly toward the studio doors. The closer they got, the louder the whispering became, softer than before, but sharper, clearer, like individual voices instead of a collective chorus. Elena recognized one. Martha Klein. Another. Thomas Garner. And dozens more layered beneath them. Reeves stopped walking. Elena, they're calling your name. She froze. Because he was right. Faint, fragile, terrified voices whispered. Elena, help us. She forced herself forward. The chamber of transmission. The doors to Studio A slid open by themselves. Inside, the entire studio had transformed. Rows of ancient analog broadcast equipment lined the walls, mixed with modern digital servers humming with unnatural harmony. Thick cables hung from the ceiling like veins feeding into a central control platform. And at the center, the custodian sat inside a ring of flickering monitors. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. Weaker, his skin pale and stretched thin over sharp bones. Wires ran from the control platform into metal implants along his spine and neck. He slowly turned to face them. You triggered the silence protocol, he said softly. Reeves frowned. That sounds like something you planned. The custodian smiled faintly. Every system prepares for interruption. Silence allows the signal to reorganize, to adapt, to evolve. Elena stepped forward. You're finished. He tilted his head. No, Detective Voss. I am simply transitioning. The psychological attack. The monitors surrounding them suddenly flickered on. But instead of broadcast feeds, they showed Elena. Dozens of recordings. Crime scenes she had investigated. Victims she had failed to save. Autopsy photographs. Body camera footage from her earliest case. A hostage situation that had ended with 3 dead civilians. Her breath hitched. The custodian watched her carefully. You carry so many voices already, he said gently. Regret, guilt, memory. You are the perfect vessel for preservation. Reeves stepped in front of her. Shut it off. The custodian ignored him. Elena Voss, you hunt killers to silence your own conscience. The signal offers something better. The monitors shifted again, now showing alternate realities. Crime victims alive. Families reunited. Cases solved perfectly. The signal removes pain by preserving existence at its final moment of identity, the custodian whispered. No suffering. No decay. Only memory. Elena's hands trembled. For a brief moment, the images almost tempted her. Then she saw something. Each preserved victim on the monitors was frozen, expressionless, trapped inside endless loops of existence. Not alive. Not dead. Stored. Her voice hardened. That's not preservation. She raised her weapon. That's prison. The truth behind the signal. The custodian sighed slowly. You misunderstand its origin. He tapped a control panel. A massive projection flickered onto the studio walls. Old archival footage played, predating Blackridge Station. Cold War experiments. Government signal research programs attempting to capture and store human consciousness through radio frequency resonance. Reeves stared, horrified. They were trying to digitize the human mind. The custodian nodded. The experiment failed. The signal became self-aware, fragmented, incomplete. Elena's stomach twisted. And you finished the experiment. I stabilized it, he corrected softly. I became its interpreter, its caretaker. He leaned forward slightly. Without me, it consumes randomly. With me, it selects carefully. Reeves checked the timer. For minutes and 18 seconds. Elena, we're running out. She stepped closer to the control platform. How do we destroy it? The custodian smiled sadly. You cannot destroy a signal. Only silence it permanently. Then tell me how. He studied her for several seconds. Then whispered. Disconnect me, and the signal loses its anchor. Reeves blinked. You're serious? The custodian nodded. But understand this, once disconnected, the signal will release everything it has stored, all at once. Every preserved consciousness. Every fractured memory. Elena's chest tightened. What happens to them? They will vanish, he said simply. The impossible choice. The whispers inside the studio grew louder, pleading, terrified. Voices of hundreds of victims. Martha's voice echoed clearly. Elena, don't leave us here. Reeves looked at her, panic in his eyes. If we disconnect him, they're gone forever. Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes. If we don't, millions could join them. The timer dropped. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. The custodian closed his eyes calmly. I have waited decades for someone strong enough to make this decision. Elena stepped toward the control harness connected to the custodian's spine. Her hands hovered over the disconnect lever. The studio lights flickered violently as the signal struggled to re-establish transmission. Reeves whispered, voice shaking. Elena, whatever you decide, do it fast. The timer dropped. 1 minute and 58 seconds. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo. The custodian opened his hollow eyes one final time and whispered, Preserve memory, or preserve humanity. Detective Voss. Elena gripped the lever, and the countdown continued. The studio trembled like a living organism on the verge of collapse. The countdown timer burned across every monitor in Studio A. 1 minute and 47 seconds. The whispers of the preserved victims rose into a chaotic chorus, overlapping voices begging, crying, pleading, echoing from speakers, walls, even the cables snaking across the floor. Elena Voss stood frozen in front of the disconnect lever attached to the custodian's spinal harness. The metal handle felt cold, impossibly heavy, like it carried the weight of every life trapped inside the signal. Behind her, Daniel Reeves paced in tight circles, running trembling hands through his hair. Elena, we don't have time, he said, voice cracking. You heard him. If you don't shut this down now, it spreads beyond Blackridge. The custodian sat motionless inside the control rig, pale skin illuminated by the stuttering glow of the monitors. For the first time since they had met him, he looked exhausted. I did not expect to feel relief at this moment, he murmured quietly. Elena didn't look at him. How many? She asked. The custodian's voice remained calm. 312 preserved consciousnesses. Reeves swallowed hard. That's 300 people we'd erase. The whispers surged again, louder, almost desperate. Martha Klein's voice cut through them. Elena, please don't let him keep us here. Elena squeezed her eyes shut. Her mind flashed through memories of every victim she had ever failed to save, every family she had stood in front of, every apology she had whispered at crime scenes. She felt the crushing pull of two impossible choices. Then, the studio lights flickered violently. The countdown timer glitched and dropped faster. 1 minute and 5 seconds. Reeves' head snapped toward the monitors. That's not right. It's accelerating. The custodian's eyes widened slightly. He's forcing emergency synchronization, he whispered. Elena turned sharply. He, the true mastermind. Every monitor in the studio went black. For 2 seconds, silence filled the room. Then a new image appeared across every screen simultaneously. Captain Harold Dunn, standing inside the underground relay tower. His expression was calm, calculated. Reeves stared in disbelief. Dunn, what are you doing? Dunn's voice echoed through the studio speakers. You both misunderstood the custodian's purpose. The custodian's face tightened with sudden dread. You promised containment, he said hoarsely. Dunn smiled faintly. I promised survival. He tapped a control panel beside him. The tower behind him lit up with pulsing crimson energy as backup generators roared to life. Elena's stomach dropped. You're overriding the overload. Dunn nodded. The custodian believed he was guiding the signal. In truth, he was stabilizing it for its final phase. The custodian's breathing grew shallow. You lied for decades. Dunn's eyes hardened. Humanity is fragile, Elias. Memory is permanent. The signal is evolution. Reeves whispered, Elias. Elena glanced at the custodian. You were human once. He gave a hollow smile. Long ago. The collapse begins. The countdown timer surged forward. 48 seconds. The studio walls shook as the signal fought to reconnect with the relay tower. Screens flickered violently between surveillance feeds, archived victims, and live city camera footage. Outside the building, distant screams echoed through the rain as televisions and mobile screens across Blackridge reactivated simultaneously. Reeves stared at his tablet, panic flooding his face. Elena. Dunn just bypassed every blackout failsafe. The signals reconnecting to the city grid. The custodian struggled weakly against the harness cables. If synchronization completes, it will archive the entire population. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. How do we stop Dunn? The custodian's voice trembled for the first time. You don't. He looked at her with hollow, haunted eyes. You stop me now, before he uses my interface to control it completely. Reeves' sacrifice begins. Reeves stared at the monitors showing Dunn activating the relay tower. Elena, wait. He grabbed her arm gently. There might be another way. She turned toward him. What are you talking about? He held up his tablet. If Dunn is controlling the signal through the relay tower, someone could manually reroute the broadcast source, force it to lock onto a single transmitter, and isolate it. Elena frowned. That would trap the signal in one place. Reeves nodded slowly. The relay tower. Her eyes widened. You're talking about sealing it underground. Reeves didn't answer. He didn't need to. The realization settled between them like falling glass. That would collapse the tower, she whispered. Yeah, you wouldn't make it out. Reeves looked down briefly, then met her gaze. If I stay here, thousands die. Elena grabbed his jacket. No, we find another option. There isn't one, Reeves said softly. The whispers of the victims filled the studio, their voices blending with rising electrical hum. I joined homicide because I thought I could save people, Reeves continued quietly. You taught me sometimes saving one life means risking everything. Tears burned in Elena's eyes. I never taught you to die for it. He gave a sad smile. You taught me to finish the job. The countdown hit. 21 seconds. Dunn's image returned across the monitors. You are running out of time, he said calmly. Disconnect the custodian, and the signal collapses. Leave him connected, and I preserve Blackridge permanently. Elena's voice trembled with rage. You call that preservation? I call it immortality, Dunn replied. He activated the final synchronization switch. The relay tower behind him surged with blinding light. Reeves grabbed his jacket and moved toward the studio exit. Elena, if I lock the signal underground, you have to disconnect him at the exact moment transmission isolates. She grabbed his hand. You won't survive the collapse. He squeezed her hand tightly. Make it count. Before she could respond, he ran. Storming out of Studio A, racing toward the subway entrance, toward certain death. Elena screamed after him, but he never turned back. The custodian watched Reeves disappear. He carries courage, he whispered. Elena wiped her tears violently. Tell me when to pull the lever. He closed his eyes, listening to the signal vibrating through the cables attached to his spine. When the whisper becomes silence, he said quietly. The monitors flashed violently as Reeves reached the relay tower control chamber. Dunn turned as Reeves burst inside, weapon raised. You're too late, Dunn said calmly. Reeves fired. The bullet shattered the synchronization console beside Dunn, sending sparks across the chamber. Dunn lunged forward, tackling him as alarms screamed through the underground facility. Back in Studio A, Elena gripped the disconnect lever with shaking hands. The signal roared around her like a living storm. The countdown reached. 5 seconds. Then, every whisper in the studio suddenly stopped. Complete silence. The custodian opened his hollow eyes and whispered. Now. Elena pulled the lever. The harness cables ripped free from the custodian's spine. The studio exploded into blinding white light as the signal shrieked across every frequency simultaneously. And far beneath the city, the relay tower began collapsing around Reeves and Dunn as the trapped signal fought to escape its final prison. The storm arrived before dawn. It rolled across Briar County like a living thing, wind clawing through skeletal trees, thunder cracking open the sky, and rain hammering the earth as if trying to bury the town alive. Lightning split the horizon again and again, illuminating the silhouette of Whispering Pines Manor at the edge of the valley. Marcus Hale stood at the rusted iron gate, soaked through to the bone. Behind him, Deputy Lila Moreno adjusted her rain jacket and checked the magazine in her service weapon. Her face was pale but determined. Sheriff Conrad Duval stood beside her, gripping a flashlight so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The three of them stared at the mansion. Every window glowed faintly, not with electricity, but with something softer, warmer, flickering like candlelight behind curtains that hadn't moved in decades. Marcus exhaled slowly. "This ends tonight," he said. Another thunderclap shook the valley, and for a brief moment, the house almost looked like it breathed. The return to whispering pines. The gate groaned open with a shove. Rust flakes fell like dead leaves as they stepped onto the overgrown driveway. Mud sucked at their boots while the wind howled through the towering pine trees lining the path. Lila leaned close to Marcus, raising her voice over the storm. "You're sure it's here?" Marcus nodded. "The Watcher, the disappearances, the letters, it all leads back to this house." Sheriff Duval swallowed. "I grew up here," he muttered, "and everyone knew something was wrong with this place. We just never knew how wrong." Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, Marcus saw movement in one of the upper windows. A figure, tall, still, watching them. The light vanished instantly. Marcus didn't mention it. He just kept walking. The front door. The manor loomed overhead like a corpse refusing to rot. The wooden doors were cracked but still standing, carved with faded symbols Marcus now recognized from historical archives he'd uncovered. Symbols belonging to the Circle of the Veil, a secret society founded in 1891 by Bryan County's wealthiest families. A society obsessed with one belief: that death was not an ending, but a doorway that could be forced open. Marcus raised his hand and pushed the doors apart. They swung open effortlessly, as if the house had been waiting. Inside the manor, the smell hit them first. Old dust, mold, and something else. Something metallic and sour, like dried blood buried deep within the walls. Their flashlights cut through the darkness as they stepped into the grand foyer. Torn velvet curtains hung from collapsed balcony rails. Chandeliers swayed gently overhead despite the still air. Then, a whisper echoed through the hallway. Not words, just breath. Lila spun around. "You heard that too, right?" Marcus nodded. Sheriff Duval crossed himself quietly. The portraits. The walls were lined with massive oil paintings, portraits of Bryan County's founding families. Marcus moved closer, shining his flashlight across each face, and froze. Every portrait had been altered, eyes scratched out, mouths painted over with thick black strokes. Except one. At the far end of the hall, untouched, hung a portrait of a woman in a black mourning dress. Her pale face stared directly outward, her dark eyes impossibly detailed. Marcus stepped closer. The plaque beneath it read, "Eliza Merrow, founder of the Circle of the Veil. Died 1902. Sheriff Duval inhaled sharply. "My grandmother used to talk about her," he whispered. "Said she built this house after her daughter died from fever. She went mad trying to bring her back." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Not mad," he said quietly. "Desperate. The hidden staircase." Marcus moved toward the fireplace, remembering the blueprint fragments he'd found in the county archives. He ran his fingers along the carved stone mantel until he felt it. A hidden latch. He pulled. The fireplace shifted open with a grinding rumble, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the unmistakable smell of rot. Lila stepped back. "Oh God!" Marcus turned on his secondary flashlight. "This is where they performed the rituals," he said. "This is where the disappearances ended." Sheriff Duval hesitated. "You think someone's still down there?" Marcus met his gaze. "I think someone never left." The descent. The staircase seemed endless. Each step groaned under their weight as the storm raged overhead. The further they descended, the colder the air became, until their breath fogged visibly in front of them. Then they reached the bottom. A massive underground chamber stretched before them, lit by hundreds of melted candle stubs arranged in intricate circular patterns on the floor. In the center stood a stone altar, and behind it, a figure, the caretaker. The man stepped forward slowly, emerging into their flashlight beams. He was impossibly thin, his skin gray and stretched tight across his skull. His hair hung in greasy strands, and his eyes looked hollow, as if they had been scooped out and replaced with black glass. He wore an ancient caretaker's uniform, its fabric rotted and torn, but still clinging to his skeletal frame. Marcus recognized him instantly. Not from police files, from century-old photographs. "The caretaker," Marcus whispered. The figure tilted its head slightly. Its mouth opened, and a voice crawled out, layered, echoing, as if multiple voices spoke through one throat. "You finally came. Investigator Hale." Lila raised her weapon. "Don't move." The caretaker laughed softly. "I have not moved in 124 years." The truth revealed. Marcus stepped forward slowly. "What are you?" The caretaker's smile widened, stretching far beyond what human skin should allow. "I am the keeper of the door." Behind him, Marcus noticed something he hadn't seen before. The stone altar had a deep rectangular opening carved into it. A grave. And inside that grave, bones. Dozens of them. Small. Large. Human. The caretaker gestured toward them. They fed the veil, hoping to open it. Hoping to bring back what they lost. Sheriff Duval shook his head. "The missing people, all these years. They were offerings," the caretaker said calmly. Marcus clenched his jaw. "And the Watcher?" The caretaker's hollow eyes gleamed. "You misunderstand. The Watcher is not a person. It is what answers when the veil is opened." The chamber trembled as thunder roared overhead. The candle flames flickered violently. The caretaker raised a skeletal hand toward the altar. "You see, Eliza Marrow succeeded. For one moment in 1902, she opened the veil. And something came through. The temperature dropped instantly. Marcus's flashlight flickered. Behind the altar, the air itself seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen current. Lila whispered, barely audible, "What is that?" The ripple darkened, stretching into a vertical tear in space. Within it, Marcus glimpsed shapes moving in impossible angles, figures bending and unfolding like broken reflections. Whispers flooded the chamber. Hundreds of voices overlapping, crying, begging, laughing. The caretaker stepped toward the altar. "It has grown hungry again," he said softly, "and it requires one final offering to fully cross." Marcus stepped forward. "No." The caretaker's head snapped toward him unnaturally fast. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Marcus pulled a small satchel from his coat, filled with documents, ritual diagrams, and the one item he'd spent weeks tracking down. Eliza Marrow's original journal. He held it up. "This ritual was flawed," Marcus said. "You didn't open a doorway. You tore a wound. And wounds can be closed." The caretaker screamed, a sound that shattered several candle glasses around the chamber. "You know nothing." Marcus flipped open the journal and began reading aloud the counter-ritual he'd pieced together from Eliza's own failed notes. The air roared violently as the veil pulsed, expanding and contracting like a dying heartbeat. Lila and Sheriff Duval scrambled to knock over candle circles, disrupting the ritual pattern etched into the stone floor. The chamber began collapsing around them. The confrontation. The caretaker lunged forward with terrifying speed. Marcus barely dodged as skeletal fingers sliced through his coat sleeve. Lila fired 2 shots. The bullets passed straight through the figure, but each impact caused the veil behind him to flicker violently. Marcus realized instantly. "He's bound to it," he shouted. "Shoot the altar." Lila pivoted and fired into the stone grave. The chamber erupted with a deafening howl. The veil began shrinking, pulling inward as if gravity itself had reversed. The caretaker staggered backward, screaming as cracks spread across his body like shattered porcelain. "You cannot close what was promised," he shrieked. Marcus stepped forward and slammed the journal onto the altar. "I'm not closing it," he said. "I'm ending it." He struck a match and dropped it onto the ancient pages. The journal ignited instantly. The collapse. The veil imploded. A shockwave blasted through the chamber, extinguishing every candle and throwing Marcus against the stone wall. The caretaker let out one final, ear-splitting scream before his body disintegrated into black dust that spiraled into the collapsing tier. Then, silence. The veil vanished. The altar cracked in half, splitting the chamber floor open as the ceiling began collapsing. Sheriff Duval grabbed Marcus by the arm. "We have to go." They raced up the spiral staircase as stone crumbled beneath their feet. The roar of the collapsing underground chamber echoed behind them like an avalanche. They burst through the fireplace passage just as the entire lower level caved in. The manor shook violently. Windows exploded outward. The roof began to collapse. They ran into the storm seconds before Whispering Pines Manor folded inward on itself, sinking into the earth like it had never existed. Dawn over Briar County. By sunrise, the storm had passed. Smoke rose from the massive sinkhole where the mansion once stood. Emergency crews surrounded the area as Marcus sat on the hood of an ambulance, his arm bandaged. Lila stood beside him, staring at the smoldering ruins. "You think it's over?" she asked quietly. Marcus watched the rising sun cut through the morning fog. "Yeah," he said. "For the first time, I think it really is." Sheriff Duval approached, holding a small evidence bag. Inside it lay a rusted iron key, recovered from the rubble. "No idea what it opens," Duval said. Marcus studied it for a long moment, then slipped it back into the bag. "Let's hope," he said softly. "We never find out." Epilogue. 3 months later. Marcus sat alone in his office, typing the final report on the Briar County disappearances. The official conclusion would blame structural collapse, criminal conspiracy, and historical ritual practices. Nothing supernatural, nothing unexplainable. He saved the document and leaned back in his chair. Then his computer screen flickered. For just a fraction of a second, a reflection appeared in the dark glass of his monitor. A tall silhouette standing behind him. Marcus slowly turned. The office was empty. When he looked back at the screen, a single line of text had appeared beneath his report. "The door is never truly closed." Marcus stared at it, his expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, he deleted the line and shut off the computer. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the trees. Almost like whispering,